So I've been working on the issue of the Mentats and how they were adapted in Dune Part 1, and I try to keep it fairly analytic. And unfortunately, this may be basically a kind of bad news video. Now, the good news is, yes, they did film additional scenes. Denis has confirmed this finally in many interviews, but the one I'm using is the Empire interview. And the issue is also the interviewer, who seemed a little polemical, frankly, and leading the interview. Not that Denis objected, because it seemed like they were on the same wavelength, but they did note the sadness of cutting these scenes. But the attitude was a little strange that, and it is true, I'm not denying this, that Denis is very much a Dune fan. He has been a fan since he was a teenager, but what they chose to leave in and leave out is a little problematic. So with the Mentats, what do we have? Well, we get a little bit more with each character. With Thufir, there's a much more lengthy conversation between him and Paul, where he's being offered to become a Mentat and to begin serious training as a Mentat. He also gives some forewarning of what he thinks that the Harkonnens are up to. And the actor who played Thufir confirmed this, that yeah, there were many more extensive conversations with him and Duke Leto. So we got a fuller sense of the Mentats and their importance to House Atreides and in the larger Dune universe. With Piter, there was also some additional scenes as well, where we got apparently a torture scene that he's involved. He also apparently had a scene with Thufir himself, where he basically mocks him for beating them in the battlefield and him kind of gloating over their victory. And there's a couple little bit other things. Apparently, the opening narration goes through the Mentats briefly, but it doesn't mention them as part of the Dune universe. Again, the narration we have in the film is by Zendaya, but originally it was going to be by one of the Bene Gesserit, and apparently they were narrating a very short history of what they know of the Dune universe. We have a lot of additional things, which hopefully some of it will appear in part 2, but again, I'm not very hopeful, because here we get to the bad news, where Denis, yes, admits it was painful for him to cut a lot of these things, but that was not what was painful for him. He admits he would have liked more things in Dune Part 1, but the Mentats are something he didn't seem to be too worked over. They did concentrate on another scene, one with Gurney Halleck, where he's playing a musical instrument. He really didn't like cutting that. So they went into that a little bit in detail, how much time and energy they spent. They actually even composed a song, and apparently Josh Brolin even sung the song. So they actually concentrated a lot on Gurney and his backstory and giving a lot more details of the character. Now, again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just kind of puzzled that it sort of became a zero-sum game, that the more they concentrated on Gurney, the less they would have for the Mentats. And also, he has been clear that for some time, for him, Part 1 was essentially a Paul Jessica story, and we were going to get a lot more about the Bene Gesserit in Part 1, and then we were going to spread out to other characters and other parts of the mythos, especially the Fremen, because we do get the Fremen in a decent amount, but it is kind of comparatively small, and it may be a little distorted if you haven't read the books, because it is done pretty well. When there's a quote spitting scene, it looks very comedic and it looks very shocking what Stilgar does. But again, if you read the book, you'll realize, oh yeah, this is one of the ceremonies, and it comes off a little bit differently. So they did some playful things in translating the material. I'm not denying that. We can argue whether it still made sense, it was a legitimate choice, but I don't think Denis' attitude is disrespectful. It's just they have so much time, they have a constraint on resources, they don't have $500 million. That's understandable. And if he likes or prefers Gurney and the story with him, that's what fans do. They focus on certain things and not the other. It just feels a little sad that that part of the mythos may not get the attention it should get with part 2. I was hopeful that some of this material would appear in part 2, but apparently his real focus is going to be on the Fremen, going to be on Paul, going to be on Stilgar, and apparently some of the more of the Bene Gesserit. And he's definitely said, yeah, Zendaya is going to be a big part of it. The Mentats, hopefully we'll get a little bit more material, maybe in flashback form, if we still see just a little bit about the Mentats in part two. Don't be disappointed. That's very intentional. They just apparently don't think the Mentats themselves are all that important. And I hope that attitude changes. And again, we're going to get a lot of more bites at the apple with Dune Sisterhood, series now coming out. And we're also going to get Dune Messiah. So hopefully we're going to get some fill in the blanks on the Mentat. Again, we have the books, so no need to panic, but it would have been nice to finally get them a much more proper cinematic treatment, because that is one major flaw with the Dune version that Lynch made, as well as the sci-fi version. The Mentats have always gotten kind of short shrift. They've gotten a little bit of representation, but not that much comparatively, and that's kind of a shame.